in them today? Is there such a future for manufacturers of ultrasonic equipment that ordinary price earnings may be disregarded? Is a company better or worse for the American investor if an abnormally large part of its earning power is derived from foreign operations? These are all matters about which the ideas of the multitude may have swung too far or not far enough right now. If he is thinking of participating in the affected companies, the wise investor must determine which are fundamental trends that will go further, and which are fads of the moment. These investment fads and misinterpretations of facts may run for several months or several years. In the long run, however, realities not only terminate them, but frequently, for a time, cause the affected stocks to go too far in the opposite direction. The ability to see through some majority opinions to find what facts are really there is a trait that can bring rich rewards in the field of common stocks. It is not easy to develop, however, for the composite opinion of those with whom we associate is a powerful influence upon the minds of us all. There is one factor which all of us can recognize, however, and which can help powerfully in not just following the crowd. This is realization that the financial community is usually slow to recognize a fundamentally changed condition, unless a big name or a colorful single event is publicly associated with that change. The ABC Company's shares have been selling at a very low price, in spite of the attractiveness of its industry, because it has been badly managed. If a widely known man is put in as the new president, the shares will usually not only respond at once, but will probably over-respond. This is because the time it takes to bring about basic improvement will probably be overlooked in the first enthusiasm. However, if the change to a superb management comes from the brilliance of heretofore little-known executives, months or years may go by during which the company will still have poor financial repute and sell at a low ratio to earnings. Recognizing such situations, prior to the price spurt that will inevitably accompany the financial community's correction of its appraisal, is one of the first and simplest ways in which the fledgling investor can practice thinking for himself rather than following the crowd. How I go about finding a growth stock. After the publication of the original edition of Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits, I began receiving an amazing, to me, number of letters from readers all over the country. One of the most common requests made was for more detailed data about just what an investor, or his financial advisor, should do to find investments that will lead to spectacular gains in market price. Since there is so much interest in this matter, it may be beneficial to include some comments on this subject here. Doing these things takes a great deal of time, as well as skill and alertness. This small investor may feel a disproportionate amount of work is involved for the sums he has at his disposal. It would be nice, not only for him but also for the large investor, if there were some easy, quick way of selecting bonanza stocks. I strongly doubt that such a way exists. How much time should be spent on these matters is, of course, something each investor must decide for himself in relation to the sums he has available for investment, his interests, and his capabilities. I cannot say with any assurance that my method is the only possible system for finding bonanza investments. Nor can I even be completely sure that it is the best method, although, obviously, if I thought some other available approach were better I would not be using this one. For some years, however, I have followed the steps I am about to outline in detail. Doing this has worked and worked well for me. Particularly in the highly important earlier stages, someone else with greater background knowledge, better contacts, or more ability might make some important variations in these methods and attain further improvement in overall results. There are two stages in the following outline, at each of which the quality of the decisions made will have tremendous effect upon the financial results obtained. Everyone will recognize instantly the overwhelming importance of the decision at the second of these two critical points, which is, do I now buy this particular stock or do I not? What may not be as easy to recognize is that right at the start of an organized method for selecting common stocks, decisions must also be made that can have just about as great an impact on the chance of uncovering an investment that 10 years later will have increased, say, 12-fold in value on rather than that has not quite doubled. This is the problem that confronts anyone about to start on a quest for a major growth security. There are literally thousands of stocks in dozens of industries that could conceivably qualify as worthy of the most intensive study. You cannot be sure about many of them until considerable work has been done. However, no one could possibly have the time to investigate more than a tiny percent of the available field. How do you select the one or the very few stocks to the investigation of which you will devote such time as you have to spare? This is a far more complex problem than it seems. You must make decisions that can easily screen out from investigation situations that a few years later have produced fortunes. You may make decisions that limit your work to rather barren soil, in that as you gather more data the outlook appears more and more clear that you are approaching the answer you are bound to find in the overwhelming majority of all investigations. This is that the company is run-of-the-mill or maybe a little better, but that it just is not the occasional bonanza that leads to spectacular profit. Yet this key decision determines whether, financially speaking, you are prospecting rich or poor on the basis of relatively little knowledge of the facts. This is because you must make decisions on what to or what not to spend your time before you have done enough work to have a proper basis for your conclusion. If you have done enough work to have adequate background for your decisions, you will have already spent so much time on each situation that, in effect, you will have made this vital first decision on a snap basis anyway. You just will not have realized that you have done so. Some years ago I would sincerely but mistakenly have told you that I used what would have sounded like a neat method for solving this problem. As a result of companies which I had already investigated, and particularly as a result of familiarity with the companies in which the funds I managed were concentrated, I had become friendly with a sizable number of quite able business executives and scientists. I could talk to these people about companies other than their own. I believe that ideas and leads furnished by such unusually well-informed contacts would provide a magnificent supply of prospects for investigation that would contain an abnormally large percent of companies that might prove to have the outstanding characteristics I am constantly seeking. However, I attempt to use the same analytical and self-critical methods of improving the techniques of my own business that I expect the companies in which I invest to use to improve their operations. Therefore, some years ago I made a study to determine two things. How had I come to select the companies which I had chosen for investigation? With hindsight to help me, were there significant variations in the percentage of worthwhile results, in the way of outstanding investments subsequently acquired, between investigations made as a result of the original spark plug idea coming from one type of source and those coming from sources of a completely different nature? What I found astonished me but is entirely logical on analysis. The business executive scientist's classification, which I had believed was my main source of original ideas causing me to investigate one company rather than another, actually had furnished only about 1/5 of the leads that had excited me enough to engage in a further study of even greater significance. These leads had not proven an above-average source of good investments. This 1/5 of total investigations had led to only about 1/6 of all worthwhile purchases. In contrast, The first original idea for almost 4/5 of the investigations and almost 5/6 of the ultimate payout, as measured by worthwhile purchases, had come from a quite different group. Across the nation I had gradually come to know and respect a small number of men whom I had seen do outstanding work of their own in selecting common stocks for growth. A not necessarily complete list of these able investment men would include one or more living in such widely scattered places as New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Buffalo, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. In many instances I might not agree at all with the conclusions of any of these men as to a stock they particularly liked, even to the point of feeling it worthy of investigation. In one or two cases, I might even consider the thoroughness of their work as suspect. However, because in each case I knew their financial minds were keen and their records impressive, I would be disposed to listen eagerly to details they might furnish concerning any company within my range of interests that they considered unusually attractive for major appreciation. Furthermore, since they were trained investment men, I could usually get rather quickly their opinion upon the key matters most important to me in my decision as to whether it might be a good gamble to investigate the company in question. What are these key matters? Essentially they cover how the company would measure up to our already discussed 15 points, with special emphasis in this preliminary stage on two specific subjects. Is the company in, or being steered toward, lines of business affording opportunities of unusual growth in sales? Are these lines where, as the industry grows, it would be relatively simple for newcomers to start up and displace the leading units? If the nature of the business is such that there is little way of preventing newcomers from entering the field, the investment value of such growth as occurs may prove rather slight. How about using investment men of fewer accomplishments or less ability as a source of original leads on what to investigate? If I did not feel that better men were available, I doubtless would use them somewhat more than I do. I always try to find the time at least to listen once to any investment man, if only to be on the alert for keen younger men coming up in the business and to be sure I am not overlooking one. However, the competition for time is terrific. As I downgrade either a financial man's investment judgment or his reliability as to facts presented, I find my tendency to spend time investigating the company he presents decreasing even more than proportionally. How about selecting original leads for investigation from the ideas in printed material? Occasionally I have been influenced by the special reports issued by the most reliable brokerage houses when these reports are not for widespread distribution but solely to a few selected people. However, on the whole, I would feel the typical public printed brokerage bulletin available to everyone is not a fertile source. There is too much danger of inaccuracies in them. More important, most only repeat what is already common knowledge in the financial community. Similarly, I will occasionally get a worthwhile idea from the best of the trade and financial periodicals, which I find quite helpful for completely different purposes. But because I believe they have certain inherent limitations on what they can print about many of the matters of greatest interest to me, I do not find them a rich source of new ideas on the best companies to investigate. There is another possible source of worthwhile original leads which others with better technical backgrounds or greater ability might be able to employ profitably, although I have not successfully done so. This source is the major consulting research laboratories such as Arthur D. Little, Stanford Research Institute, or Battelle. I have found that personnel of these organizations have great understanding of just the business and technical developments from which worthwhile original investment ideas should come. However, I have found the usefulness of this group largely blocked by their tendency, which is entirely praiseworthy, to be unwilling to discuss most of what they know because it might violate the confidence of the client companies for which they have worked. If someone smarter than I am could find a way, without injury to these client companies, of unlocking the mine of investment information I suspect these organizations possess, he might well have found a means of importantly improving on my methods regarding this particular step in the quest for growth stocks. So much for step 1. On the basis of a few hours conversation, usually with an outstanding investment man, occasionally with a business executive or scientist, I have made a decision that a particular company might be exciting. I will start my investigation. What do I do next? There are 3 things I emphatically do not do. I do not, for reasons that I think will soon become clear, approach anyone in the management at this stage. I do not spend hours and hours going over old annual reports and making minute studies of minor year-by-year changes in the balance sheet. I do not ask every stockbroker I know what he thinks of the stock. I will, however, glance over the balance sheet to determine the general nature of the capitalization and financial position. If there is a second prospectus, I will read with care those parts covering breakdown of total sales by product lines, competition, degree of officer or other major ownership of common stock. This can also usually be obtained from the proxy statement, and all earnings statement figures throwing light on depreciation and depletion, if any, profit margins, extent of research activity, and abnormal or non-recurring costs in prior years' operations. Now I am ready really to go to work. I will use the scuttlebutt method I have already described just as much as I possibly can. Here, rather than as a source of original ideas for investment, is where the people I have come to know in the business executive scientist group can be of inestimable value. I will try to see, or reach on the telephone, every key customer, supplier, competitor, ex-employee, or scientist in a related field that I know or whom I can approach through mutual friends. However, suppose I still do not know enough people or do not have a friend of a friend who knows enough of the people who can supply me with the required background. What do I do then? Frankly, if I am not even close to getting much of the information I need, I will give up the investigation and go on to something else. To make big money on investments, it is unnecessary to get some answer to every investment that might be considered. What is necessary is to get the right answer a large proportion of the very small number of times actual purchases are made. For this reason, if way too little background is forthcoming and the prospects for a great deal more are bleak, I believe the intelligent thing to do is to put the matter aside and go on to something else. However, suppose quite a bit of background has become available. You have called on everyone you know or can readily approach, but have spotted 1 or 2 people who you believe could do much to complete your picture if they would talk freely to you. I would not just walk in on them off the street. Most people, interested as they may be in the industry in which they are engaged, are not inclined to tell to total strangers what they really think about the strong and weak points of a customer, a competitor, or a supplier. I would find out the commercial bank of the people I want to meet. If in matters of this sort you approach a commercial bank that knows you, tell them frankly whom you want to meet and exactly why. It is surprising how obliging most commercial bankers will be in trying to help you, provided you do not bother them too often. It is possibly even more surprising how helpful most businessmen will try to be if you are introduced to them by the regular bankers. Of course, this help will only be forthcoming if the bankers in question have no doubt whatsoever that the information you are seeking is solely for background purposes in determining whether to make an investment, and that under no circumstance would you ever embarrass anyone by quoting the source of any derogatory information. If you follow these rules, banking help can, at times, help complete the stage of an investigation that otherwise might never be complete enough to be of any value. It is only after Scuttlebutt has obtained for you a large part of the data that in our chapter on the 15 points I indicated can best be obtained from such sources, that you should be ready to take the next step and think about approaching the management. I think it rather important that investors thoroughly understand why this is so. Good managements, those most suitable for outstanding investment, are nearly all quite frank in answering questions about the company's weak points as fully as about its strong points. However, no matter how punctilious a management may be in this respect, no corporate officer in his own self-interest can be expected, unasked, to volunteer some of the most significant matters for you, the investor, to know. How can a vice president to whom you say, "Is there anything else you think I, as a prospective investor, should know about your company?" give a reply to the effect that the other top members of the management team are doing splendidly but several years of poor work by the vice president for marketing is beginning to cause weakness in sales? Could he possibly volunteer further that this may not be too important, since young Williams, on the marketing staff, has outstanding ability and in another 6 months he will be in charge and the situation brought back under control? Of course he could not volunteer these things. However, I have found that if he learns you already know of the marketing weakness, his remark may be diplomatically worded, but with the right type of management and if they have confidence in your judgment, you will be furnished with a realistic answer as to whether anything is or is not being done to remedy weaknesses of this type. In other words, only by having what Scuttlebutt can give you before you approach management, can you know what you should attempt to learn when you visit a company. Without it you may be unable to determine that most basic of points, the competency of top management itself. In even a medium-sized company, there may be a key management team of as many as 5 men. You are not apt to meet all of them on your first or second visit. If you do, you will probably meet some for such a short time you will have no basis for determining their relative ability. Frequently 1 or 2 men of the 5 will be far more able or far less able than the others. Without Scuttlebutt to guide you, depending on whom you meet you may form far too high or far too low an estimate of the entire management. With Scuttlebutt you may have formed a fairly accurate idea of who is particularly strong or particularly weak, and are in a better position to ask to meet the specific officers you may want to know better, thereby satisfying yourself as to whether the Scuttlebutt impression is correct. It is my opinion that in almost any field nothing is worth doing unless it is worth doing right. When it comes to selecting growth stocks, the rewards for proper action are so huge and the penalty for poor judgment is so great that it is hard to see why anyone would want to select a growth stock on the basis of superficial knowledge. If an investor or financial man wants to go about finding a growth stock properly, I believe one rule he should always follow is this: he should never visit the management of any company he is considering for investment until he has first gathered together at least 50% of all the knowledge he would need to make the investment. If he contacts the management without having done this first, he is in the highly dangerous position of knowing so little of what he should seek that his chance of coming up with the right answer is largely a matter of luck. There is another reason I believe it's so important to get at least half the required knowledge about a company before visiting it. Prominent management and managements in companies in colorful industries get a tremendous number of requests for their time from people in the investment business. Because the price at which their stock sells can have so much significance to them in so many ways, they will usually devote the time of valuable people to such visitors. However, from company after company I have heard the same type of comment. To no one will they be rude, but the amount of time furnished by key men, rather than by those who receive financial visitors but make few executive decisions, depends far more on the company's estimate of the competence of the visitor than it does on the size of the financial interest he represents. More important, the degree of willingness to furnish information, that is, how far the company will go in answering specific questions and discussing vital matters, depends overwhelmingly on this estimate of each visitor. Those who just drop in on a company without real advance preparation often have two strikes against them almost before the visit starts. This matter of whom you see, that it be the men who make the real decisions, rather than a sort of financial public relations officer, is so important that it is wise to go to considerable trouble to be introduced to management by the right people. An important customer or a major stockholding interest known to management can be an excellent source of introduction to pave the way for a first visit. So can the company's investment banking connections. In any event, those really wanting to get optimum results from their first visit should make sure that those introducing them have a high regard for the visitor and pass the reasons for this good opinion on to the management. Just a few weeks prior to my writing these words, an incident occurred which may illustrate how much preparation I feel should be made prior to a first call on management. I was lunching with two representatives of a major investment firm, one which is the investment banker for two of the handful of companies in which the funds I manage are invested. Knowing the small number of situations I go into and the long time I normally hold them, one of these gentlemen asked me the ratio between the new, to me, companies I visited and the ones of these into which I actually bought. I asked him to guess. He estimated I bought into one for every 250 visited. The other gentleman ventured that it might be one for every 25. Actually, it runs somewhere between 1 to every 2 and 1 to every 2.5. This is not because 1 out of every 2.5 companies I look at measures up to what I believe are my rather rigorous standards for purchase. If he had substituted companies looked at for companies visited, perhaps 1 in 40 or 50 might be about right. If he had substituted companies considered as possibilities for investigation, whether I actually investigated them or not, then the original estimate of one stock bought for every 250 considered would be rather close to the mark. What he had overlooked was that I believe it so impossible to get much benefit from a planned visit until a great deal of pertinent scuttlebutt work has been done first, and that I have found that scuttlebutt so many times furnishes an accurate forecast of how well a company will measure up to my 15 points, that usually by the time I am ready to visit the management there will be at least a fair chance that I will want to buy into the company. A great many of the less attractive situations will have been weeded out along the way. This about sums up how I go about finding growth stocks. Possibly 1/5 of my first investigations start from ideas gleaned from friends in industry and 4/5 from calling what I believe are the more attractive selections of a small number of able investment men. These decisions are frankly a fast snap judgment on which companies I should spend my time investigating and which I should ignore. Then after a brief scrutiny of a few key points and in second prospectus, I will seek scuttlebutt aggressively, constantly working toward how close to our 15-point standard the company comes. I will discard one prospective investment after another along the way. Some because the evidence piles up that they are just run-of-the-mill. Others because I cannot get enough evidence to be reasonably sure one way or the other. Only in the occasional case when I have a great amount of favorable data do I then go to the final step of contacting the management. Then if after meeting with management I find my prior hopes pretty well confirmed and some of my previous fears eased by answers that to me make sense, at last I am ready to feel I may be rewarded for all my efforts. Because I have heard them so many times, I know the objections a few of you will make to this approach. How can anyone be expected to spend this amount of time finding just one investment? Why are not the answers already neatly worked out for me by the first person in the investment business to whom I ask what I should buy? I would ask those with this reaction to look at the world around them. In what other line of activity could you put $10,000 in 1 year and 10 years later, with only occasional checking in the meantime to be sure management continues of high caliber, be able to have an asset worth from $40,000 to $150,000? This is the kind of reward gained from selecting growth stocks successfully. Is it either logical or reasonable that anyone could do this with an effort no harder than reading a few simply worded brokers' free circulars in the comfort of an armchair one evening a week? Does it make sense that anyone should be able to pick up this type of profit by paying the first investment man he sees a commission of $135, which is the New York Stock Exchange charge for buying 500 shares of stock at $20 per share? So far as I know, no other fields of endeavor offer these huge rewards this easily. Similarly, they cannot be made in the stock market unless you or your investment advisor utilize the same traits that will bring large rewards in any other field of activity. These are great effort combined with ability and enriched by both judgment and vision. If these attributes are employed and something fairly close to the rules laid down in this chapter are used to find companies measuring well on our 15-point standard but not yet enjoying as much status in the financial community as such an appraisal would warrant, the record is crystal clear that fortune-producing growth stocks can be found. However, they cannot be found without hard work and they cannot be found every day. Summary and conclusion. We are starting the second decade of a half-century that may well see the standard of living of the human race advance more than it is in the preceding 5,000 years. Great have been the investment risks of the recent past. Even greater have been the financial rewards for the successful. However, in this field of investment, the risks and rewards of the past 100 years may be small beside those of the next 50. In these circumstances it may be well to take stock of our situation. We almost certainly have not conquered the business cycle. We may not even have tamed it. Nevertheless, we have added certain new factors that significantly affect the art of investment in common stocks. One of these is the emergence of modern corporate management, with all that this has done to strengthen the investment characteristics of common shares. Another is the economic harnessing of scientific research and developmental engineering. The emergence of these factors has not changed the basic principles of successful common stock investment. It has made them more important than ever. This book has attempted to show what these basic principles are, what type of stock to buy, when to buy it, and most particularly, never to sell it, as long as the company behind the common stock maintains the characteristics of an unusually successful enterprise. It is hoped that those sections dealing with the most common mistakes of many otherwise able investors will prove of some interest. It should be remembered, however, that knowing the rules and understanding these common mistakes will do nothing to help those who do not have some degree of patience and self-discipline. One of the ablest investment men I have ever known told me many years ago that in the stock market a good nervous system is even more important than a good head. Perhaps Shakespeare unintentionally summarized the process of successful common stock investment. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Part 2. Conservative investors sleep well. All of my business life, I have believed that the success of my own business, or any business, depends on following the principles of 2 I's and an H. These principles are integrity, ingenuity, and hard work. I would like to dedicate this book to my 3 sons in the belief that Arthur and Ken are following the principles of the 2 I's and an H in businesses very similar to mine, as is done in one that is quite different. Introduction. While these things are hard to measure precisely, indications are overwhelming that only once before in a century has the morale of the American investor been at anything like the low ebb that exists as these words are being written. The well-known and much publicized Dow Jones Industrial Average is an excellent indicator of the day-to-day change in stock market levels. However, when a longer period is under consideration, this average may mask rather than reveal the full extent of the injuries suffered by many who have held common stocks in the recent past. One index that purports to show what has happened to all publicly traded common stocks but that does not weigh each stock issue by the number of shares outstanding shows the average stock in mid-1974 down 70% from its 1968 peak. Faced with this kind of loss, large groups of investors have acted in completely predictable ways. One group has pulled out of stocks completely. Yet many corporations are doing surprisingly well. In an environment where more and more inflation appears inevitable, properly selected stocks may be far less risky than some other placements that appear safer. There is an even larger group that is of particular interest, people who have decided that from now on we will act more conservatively. The usual rationale here is to confine purchases only to the largest companies, the names of which at least are known to almost everyone. There are probably few investors in the United States and almost none in the Northeast who do not know the names Penn Central and Consolidated Edison or the nature of these companies' services. By conventional standards, Penn Central some years ago and Consolidated Edison more recently were considered conservative investments. Unfortunately, often there is so much confusion between acting conservatively and acting conventionally that for those truly determined to conserve their assets, this whole subject needs considerable untangling, which should start with not one definition but two. 1. A conservative investment is one most likely to conserve, that is, maintain, purchasing power at a minimum of risk. 2. Conservative investing is understanding of what a conservative investment consists and then, in regard to specific investments, following a procedural course of action needed properly to determine whether specific investment vehicles are, in fact, conservative investments. Consequently, to be a conservative investor, not one but two things are required either of the investor or of those whose recommendations he is following. The qualities desired in a conservative investment must be understood. Then a course of inquiry must be made to see if a particular investment so qualifies. Without both conditions being present, the buyer of common stocks may be fortunate or unfortunate, conventional in his approach or unconventional, but he is not being conservative. It seems to me of overriding importance that confusion on matters such as these be swept aside for all time to come. Not only stockholders themselves but also the American economy as a whole cannot afford ever again to have those who make a sincere effort to understand the rules suffer the type of bloodbath recently experienced by this generation of investors, a bloodletting exceeded only by that which another generation experienced in the Great Depression some 40 years earlier. America today has unparalleled opportunities for improving the way of life for all its people. It certainly has the technical knowledge and the know-how to do so. However, To do these things in the traditional American way will require some genuine re-education as to the basic fundamentals for a great many investors as well as for many of those in the investment industry itself. Only if many more investors come to feel financially secure because they truly are secure will there be a reopening of the markets for new stock issues that will enable companies legitimately requiring additional equity funds to be in a position to secure them on a basis conducive to going ahead with new projects. If this does not happen, all that is left is to try to go ahead with what needs to be done in the way that, both here and abroad, has always proven so costly, wasteful, and inefficient, by government financing, with management under the dead end of bureaucratic officialdom. For these reasons I believe that the investors' problems of today should be met head-on and forthrightly. In an attempt to deal with these problems in this book, I have leaned heavily on the counsel of my son, Ken, who contributed the title as well as many other matters, including part of the basic conception of what lies herein. I cannot adequately acknowledge his assistance in this presentation. This book is divided into 4 distinct sections. The first deals with the anatomy, if the word may be used, of a conservative stock investment as delineated in definition number 1. The second analyzes the part played by the financial community, the mistakes, if you will, that helped produce the current bear market. This critique was not intended merely to throw rocks but to point out that similar errors can be avoided in the future and that certain basic investment principles become clear when the mistakes of the recent past are studied. The third section deals with the course of action that must be taken to qualify as conservative investing as delineated in definition number 2. The final section deals with some of the influences rampant in today's world that have caused grave doubts in the minds of many as to whether any common stock is a suitable means for preserving assets. In other words, whether for anything other than as gambling vehicles common stocks should be considered at all. This book will, I hope, throw light on whether the problems that helped produce the recent bear market have created a condition where stock ownership is just a trap for the unwary or whether, as in every prior major bear market in U.S. history, they have created a magnificent opportunity for those with the ability and the self-discipline to think for themselves and to act independently of the popular emotions of the moment. Philip A. Fisher, San Mateo, California. 1. The first dimension of a conservative investment. Superiority in production, marketing, research, and financial skills. A corporation of the size and type to provide a conservative investment is necessarily a complex organization. To understand what must be present in such an investment, we might start by portraying one dimension of the characteristics we must be sure exist. This dimension breaks down into 4 major subdivisions. Low-cost production. To be a truly conservative investment, a company, for a majority if not for all of its product lines, must be the lowest cost producer or about as low a cost producer as any competitor. It must also give promise of continuing to be so in the future. Only in this way will it give its owners a broad enough margin between costs and selling price to create 2 vital conditions. 1 is sufficiently way below the break-even point of most competition. When a bad year hits the industry, prices are unlikely to stay for long under this break-even point. As long as they do, losses from much of the higher cost competition will be so great that some of these competitors will be forced to cease production. This almost automatically increases the profits of the surviving low-cost companies because they benefit from the increased production that comes to them as they take over demand formerly supplied by the closed plants. The low-cost company will benefit even more when the decreased supply from competitors enables it not only to do more business but also to increase prices as excess supplies stop pressing on the market. The second condition is that the greater than average profit margin should enable a company to earn enough to generate internally a significant part or perhaps all of the funds required for financing growth. This avoids much or even all of the need for raising additional long-term capital that can, a. result in new shares being issued and diluting the value of already outstanding shares and or, b. create an additional burden of debt, with fixed interest payments and fixed maturities, which must largely be met from future earnings, which greatly increase the risks of the common stock owners. However, it should be realized that, just as the degree to which a company is a low-cost producer increases the safety and conservatism of the investment, so in a boom period in a bullish market does it decrease its speculative appeal. The percentage that profits rise in such times will always be far greater for the high-cost, risky, marginal company. Simple arithmetic will explain why. Let us take an imaginary example of two companies of the same size that, when times were normal, were selling widgets at 10 cents apiece. Company A has a profit of 4 cents per widget and Company B of 1 cent. Now let us suppose that costs remain the same but a temporary extra demand for widgets pushes up the price to 12 cents, with both companies remaining the same size. The strong company has increased profits from 4 cents per widget to 6 cents, a gain of 50%, but the high-cost company has made a 300% profit gain, or tripled its profits. This is why, short range, the high-cost company sometimes goes up more in a boom and also why, a few years later, when hard times come and widgets fall back to 8 cents, the strong company is still making a reduced but comfortable profit. If the high-cost company doesn't go bankrupt, it is likely to produce another crop of badly hurt investors, or perhaps speculators who thought they were investors, who are sure something is wrong with the system rather than with themselves. All of the above has been written with manufacturing companies in mind. Hence the term production has been used. Many companies, of course, are not manufacturers but are in service lines, such as wholesaling, retailing or one of the many subdivisions of the financial world such as banking or insurance. The same principles apply, but the word operations is substituted for production and a low or high-cost operator for a low or high-cost producer. Strong marketing organization. A strong marketer must be constantly alert to the changing desires of its customers so that the company is supplying what is desired today, not what used to be desired. At the turn of the century, for example, there was something wrong with the marketing efforts of a leading manufacturer of horse-drawn buggies if it persisted in trying to compete by making finer and finer buggies rather than turning to automobiles or going out of business altogether. To bring our example up to date, perhaps well before the Arab oil embargo made every home in America aware that large automobiles were big gas guzzlers, there was something wrong with the segment of the automobile industry that failed to recognize the ever-increasing popularity of small imported compacts as a sign that public demand was swinging toward a product that cost less, was cheaper to operate, and was easier to park than the larger, flashier models that for so many years had been favorites. But recognizing changes in public taste and then reacting promptly to these changes is not enough. As has been said before, in the business world customers simply do not beat a path to the door of the man with the better mousetrap. In the competitive world of commerce it is vital to make the potential customer aware of the advantages of a product or service. This awareness can be created only by understanding what the potential buyer really wants, sometimes when the customer himself doesn't clearly recognize why these advantages appeal to him. and explaining it to him not in the seller's terms but in his terms. Whether this is best done by advertising, by salesmen making calls, by specialized independent marketing organizations, or by any combination of these depends on the nature of the business. But what is required in every instance is close control and constant managerial measurement of the cost-effectiveness of whatever means are used. Lack of outstanding management in these areas can result, a. in losing a significant volume of business that would otherwise be available, b. in having much higher costs and therefore obtaining smaller profit on what business is obtained, and c. because of companies having variations in the profitability of various elements of their product line, in failing to attain the maximum possible profit mix within the line. An efficient producer or operator with weak marketing and selling may be compared to a powerful engine that, because of a loose pulley belt or badly adjusted differential, is producing only a fraction of the results it otherwise would have attained. Outstanding research and technical effort. Not so very long ago it seemed that outstanding technical ability was vital only to a few highly scientifically oriented industries such as electronics, aerospace, pharmaceutical and chemical manufacturing. As these have grown, their ever-widening technologies have so penetrated virtually all lines of manufacturing and nearly all the service industries that today to have outstanding research and technical talent is nearly, if not quite, as important for a shoe manufacturer, a bank, a retailer or an insurance company as it is for what were once considered the exotic scientific industries that maintain large research staffs. Technological efforts are now channeled in two directions, to produce new and better products. In this connection, research scientists may, of course, do somewhat more for a chemical company than for a grocery chain, and to perform services in a better way or at a lower cost than in the past. With regard to the latter objective, outstanding technical talent can be equally valuable for either group. Actually, in some of the service businesses, technological groups are opening up new product lines as well as paving the way for performing old services better. Banks are an example. Low-cost electronic input devices and mini computers are enabling them to offer accounting and bookkeeping services to customers, thus creating a new product line for these institutions. In research and technology, there is as much variation between the efficiency of one company and another as there is in marketing. In new product development, the complexity of the task almost guarantees this. Important as it is, the degree of technical competence or ingenuity of one company's research staff as compared to that of another is only one of the factors affecting the benefits that the company derives from its research efforts. Developing new products usually calls for the pooling of the efforts of a number of researchers, each skilled in a different technological specialty. How well these individuals work together, or can be induced by a leader to work together and stimulate each other, is often as important as the individual competence of the people involved. Furthermore, to maximize profits, it is vital not to develop just any product but one for which there will be significant customer demand, one that, nearly always, can be sold by the company's existing marketing organization, and one that can be made at a price that will yield a worthwhile profit. All of this requires efficient liaison between research and both marketing and production. The best corporate research team in the world can become nothing but a liability if it develops only products that cannot be readily sold. For true investment superiority, a company must have above-average ability to control all these complex relationships, yet at the same time not so over-control them as to cause its researchers to lose the drive and the ingenuity that made them outstanding in the first place. Financial skill. Again and again in this discussion of production, marketing and research, the terms profit and profit margin have been used. In a large company with a diverse product line, it is not a simple matter to be sure of the cost of each product in relation to the rest, as most costs other than materials and direct labor are spread over a number of such products, maybe over all of them. Companies with above-average financial talent have several significant advantages. Knowing accurately how much they make on each product, they can make their greatest efforts where these will produce maximum gains. Intimate knowledge of the extent of each element of costs, not just in manufacturing but in selling and research as well, spotlights and even minor phases of company activity, the places where it is logical to make special efforts to reduce costs either through technological innovations or by improving people's specific assignments. Most important of all, through skillful budgeting and accounting. The truly outstanding company can create an early warning system whereby unfavorable influences that threaten the profit plan can be quickly detected. Remedial action can then be taken to avoid the painful surprises that have jolted investors in many companies. Nor do the goodies that accrue to investors from superior financial skills stop at this point. They usually lead to a better choice of capital investments that bring the highest return on the company's investment capital. They also can lead to better control of receivables and inventory, a matter of increasing importance in periods of high interest rates. To summarize, the company that qualifies well in this first dimension of a conservative investment is a very low-cost producer or operator in its field, has outstanding marketing and financial ability and a demonstrated above-average skill on the complex managerial problem of attaining worthwhile results from its research or technological organization. In a world where change is occurring at an ever-increasing pace, it is 1. A company capable of developing a flow of new and profitable products or product lines that will more than balance older lines that may become obsolete by the technological innovations of others. 2. A company able now and in the future to make these lines at costs sufficiently low so as to generate a profit stream that will grow at least as fast as sales and that even in the worst years of general business will not diminish to a point that threatens the safety of an investment in the business. And 3. A company able to sell its newer products and those which it may develop in the future at least as profitably as those with which it is involved today. This is a one-dimensional picture of a prudent investment, one which, if not spoiled by the view from other dimensions, represents an investment with which the investor is unlikely to become disillusioned. But before going on to examine these other dimensions, there is one additional point that should be fully understood. If the objective is conserving one's funds, if the goal is safety, why have we been talking about growth and the development of new and additional product lines? Why isn't it enough to maintain a business at its existing size and level of profits without running all the risks that occur when new endeavors are started? When we come to a discussion of the influence of inflation on investments, other reasons for the importance of growth will present themselves. But fundamentally it should never be forgotten that, in a world where change is occurring at a faster and faster pace, nothing long remains the same. It is impossible to stand still. A company will either grow or shrink. A strong offense is the best defense. Only by growing better can a company be sure of not growing worse. Companies that have failed to go uphill have invariably gone downhill, and, if that has been true in the past, it will be even more true in the future. This is because, in addition to an ever-increasing pace of technological innovation, changing social customs and buying habits and new demands of government are altering at an ever-increasing pace the rate at which even the stodgiest industries are changing. 2. The second dimension. The people factor. Briefly summarized, the first dimension of a conservative investment consists of outstanding managerial competence in the basic areas of production, marketing, research, and financial controls. This first dimension describes a business as it is today, being essentially a matter of results. The second dimension deals with what produced these results and, more importantly, will continue to produce them in the future. The force that causes such things to happen, that creates one company in an industry that is an outstanding investment vehicle and another that is average, mediocre, or worse, is essentially people. Edward H. Heller, a pioneer venture capitalist whose comments during his business life greatly influenced some of the ideas expressed in this book, used the term vivid spirit to describe the type of individual to whom he was ready to give significant financial backing. He said that behind every unusually successful corporation was this kind of determined entrepreneurial personality with a drive, the original ideas, and the skill to make such a company a truly worthwhile investment. Within the area of very small companies that grew into considerably larger and quite prosperous ones, the field of his greatest interest and where he scored his most spectacular successes, Ed Heller was undoubtedly right. But as these smaller companies grow larger on the way to becoming suitable for conservative investment, Ed Heller's view might be tempered by that of another brilliant businessman who expressed serious doubts about the wisdom of investing in a company whose president was his close personal friend. This man's reason for lack of enthusiasm, my friend, is one of the most brilliant men I've ever known. He always has to be right. In a small company this may be fine. But as you grow, your men have to be right sometimes too. Here is an indication of the heart of the second dimension of a truly conservative investment, a corporate chief executive dedicated to long-range growth who has surrounded himself with and delegated considerable authority to an extremely competent team in charge of the various divisions and functions of the company. These people must be engaged not in an endless internal struggle for power but instead should be working together toward clearly outlined corporate goals. One of these goals, which is absolutely essential if an investment is to be a truly successful one, is that top management take the time to identify and train qualified and motivated juniors to succeed senior management whenever a replacement is necessary. In turn, at each level down through the chain of command, detailed attention should be paid to whether those at this level are doing the same thing for those one level below them. Does this mean that a company that qualifies for truly conservative investing should promote only from within and should never recruit from the outside except at the lowest levels or for those just starting their careers? A company growing at a very rapid rate may have such need for additional people that there just isn't time to train from within for all positions. Furthermore, even the best-run company will at times need an individual with a highly specialized skill so far removed from the general activities of the company that such a specialty simply cannot be found internally. Someone with expertise in a particular subdivision of the law, insurance, or a scientific discipline well removed from the company's main line of activity would be a case in point. In addition, occasional hiring from the outside has one advantage: it can bring a new viewpoint into corporate councils, an injection of fresh ideas to challenge the accepted way as the best way. In general, however, the company with real investment merit is the company that usually promotes from within. This is because all companies of the highest investment order, these do not necessarily have to be the biggest and best-known companies, have developed a set of policies and ways of doing things peculiar to their own needs. If these special ways are truly worthwhile, it is always difficult and frequently impossible to retrain those long accustomed to them to different ways of getting things done. The higher up in an organization the newcomer may be, the more costly the indoctrination can be. While I can quote no statistics to prove the point, it is my observation that in better-run companies a surprising number of executives brought in close to the top tend to disappear after a few years. Of one thing the investor can be certain: large companies need to bring in a new chief executive from the outside as a damning sign of something basically wrong with the existing management, no matter how good the surface signs may have been, as indicated by the most recent earnings statement. It may well be that the new president will do a magnificent job and in time will build a genuine management team around him so that such a jolt to the existing organization will never again become necessary. Consequently, in time such a stock may become one worthy of a wise investor. But such rebuilding can be so long and risky a process that, if an investor finds this sort of thing happening in one of his holdings, he will do well to review all his investment activities to determine whether his past actions have really been proceeding from a sound base. A worthwhile clue is available to all investors as to whether a management is predominantly one man or a smoothly working team. This clue throws no light, however, on how good that team may be. The annual salaries of top management of all publicly owned companies are made public in the proxy statements. If the salary of the number one man is very much larger than that of the next two or three, a warning flag is flying. If the compensation scale goes down rather gradually, it isn't. For optimum results for the investor, it is not enough that management personnel work together as a team and be capable of filling vacancies above them. There should also be present the greatest possible number of those vivid spirits of etalers, people with the ingenuity and determination not to leave things just at their present, possibly quite satisfactory, state, but to build significant further improvements upon them. Such people are not easy to find. Motorola, Incorporated, had for some time been conducting an activity that the financial community has paid little or no attention to that indicates it is possible to accomplish dramatically more in this area than is generally considered possible. In 1967, Motorola management recognized that the rapid rate of growth anticipated in the years ahead would inevitably require steady expansion in the upper layers of management. It was decided to meet the problem head-on. In that year, Motorola opened its Executive Institute at Oracle, Arizona. It was designed so that, in an atmosphere remote from the daily details of the company's offices and plans, two things would happen. Motorola personnel of apparent unusual promise would be trained in matters beyond the scope of their immediate activities in order to be able to take on more important jobs. Top management would be furnished significant further evidence as to the degree of promotability of these same people. At the time of the Executive Institute's founding, skeptics within the management questioned whether the effort would be worth the cost. This was largely because of their belief that fewer than 100 people would be found in the whole Motorola organization with sufficient talent to make it worthwhile from the company's standpoint to provide them with this special training. Events have proven these skeptics spectacularly wrong. The Institute handles 5 to 6 classes a year, with 14 in each class. By mid-1974, about 400 Motorola people had gone through the school. And a significant number, including some present vice presidents, were found to have capabilities vastly greater than anything contemplated at the time they were approved for admission. Furthermore, those involved in this work feel that, from the company's standpoint, results in the more recent classes are even more favorable than in the earlier ones. It now appears that, as total employment at Motorola continues to expand with the company's growth, enough promising Motorola people can be found to maintain this activity indefinitely. All of this shows, from the investor's standpoint, that if enough ingenuity is used, Even the companies with well above average growth rates can also grow the needed unusual people from within so as to maintain competitive superiority without running the high risk of friction and failure that so often occurs when a rapidly growing company must go to the outside for more than a very small part of its outstanding talent. Everyone has a personality, a combination of character traits that sets him or her apart from every other individual. Similarly, every corporation has its own ways of doing things, some formalized into well-articulated policies, others not, that are at least slightly different from those of other corporations. The more successful the corporation, the more likely it is to be unique in some of its policies. This is particularly true of companies that have been successful for a considerable period of time. In contrast to individuals, whose fundamental character traits. The second dimension. Change but little once they reach maturity. The ways of companies are influenced not only by outside events but by the reactions to those events of a whole series of different personalities who, as time goes on, follow one another in the top posts within the organization. However much policies may differ among companies, there are three elements that must always be present if a company's shares are to be worthy of holding for conservative, long-range investment. 1. The company must recognize that the world in which it is operating is changing at an ever-increasing rate. All corporate thinking and planning must be attuned to challenge what is now being done, to challenge it not occasionally but again and again. Every accepted way of doing things must be examined and re-examined to be as sure as is permitted by human fallibility that this way is really the best way. Some risks must be accepted in substituting new methods to meet changing conditions. No matter how comfortable it may seem to do so, ways of doing things cannot be maintained just because they worked well in the past and are hallowed by tradition. The company that is rigid in its actions and is not constantly challenging itself has only one way to go, and that way is down. In contrast, certain managements of large companies that have deliberately endeavored to structure themselves so as to be able to change have been those producing some of the most striking rewards for their shareholders. An example of this is the Dow Chemical Company, with a record of achievements over the last 10 years that is frequently considered to surpass that of any other major chemical company in this country, if not in the entire world. Possibly Dow's most significant departure from past ways was to break its management into 5 separate managements on geographical lines: Dow USA, Dow Europe, Dow Canada, etc. It was believed that only in this way could local problems be handled quickly as best suited local conditions and without suffering from the bureaucratic inefficiencies that so often accompany bigness. The net effect of this, as told by the president of Dow Europe, the results that today challenges are being made by our sister Dow companies throughout the world. They, not our direct competitors, are turning in the gains that push us to be first. From the investor's standpoint, perhaps the most important feature of this change was not that it was made but that it was made when Dow still had a total sales volume much smaller than many other multinational companies that were operating successfully in the established way. In other words, change and improvement arose from innovative thinking to make a workable system better, not from a forced reaction to a crisis. This is but one of the many ways this pioneering company has broken with the past to attain its striking competitive record. Another was the unprecedented step for an industrial company of starting from scratch to make a success of a wholly owned bank in Switzerland so as to help finance the needs of its customers in the export market. Here again the management did not hesitate to break with the past in ways that engendered some risk in the early stages but that ended up by enhancing the intrinsic strength of the company. Many other examples could be cited from the record of this company. However, Just one more will be mentioned merely to show the extreme variety of areas such actions may cover. Far earlier than most other companies, Dow not only recognized the need to spend sizable sums to avoid pollution but concluded that, if major results were to be attained, something more was needed than just exhortations from top management. It was necessary to obtain the consistent cooperation of middle-level managers. It was decided that the surest way of doing this was to appeal to the profit motives of those most directly involved. They were encouraged to find profitable methods of converting the polluting materials to saleable products. The rest is now business history. With the full power of top management, plant management, and highly skilled chemical engineers behind these projects, Dow has achieved a series of firsts in eliminating pollution that has won them the praise of many environmental groups that are usually quite anti-business in their viewpoints. Possibly more important, they have avoided hostility in most, although not all, of the communities where their plants are located. They have done this at very little overall dollar cost and in some cases at an operating profit. 2. There must always be a conscious and continuous effort, based on fact, not propaganda, to have employees at every level, from the most newly hired blue-collar or white-collar worker to the highest levels of management, feel that the company is a good place to work. This is a world that requires most of us to put in a substantial number of hours each week doing what is asked of us by others in order to receive a paycheck, even though we might prefer to spend those hours on our own amusement or recreation. Most people recognize the necessity for this. When a management can instill a belief, not just among a few top people but generally among the employees, that it is doing everything reasonably to be expected to create a good working environment and take care of its employees' interests, the rewards the company receives in greater productivity and lower costs can vastly outweigh the costs of such a policy. The first step in this policy is seeing, not just talking about it but actually assuring, that every employee is treated with reasonable dignity and consideration. A year or so ago I read in the press that a union official claimed that one of the nation's largest companies was compelling its production line employees to eat lunch with grease-stained hands because there was not sufficient time, with the number of washroom facilities available, for most of them to be able to wash before lunch. The stock of this company was of no investment interest to me for quite different reasons. Therefore, I have no knowledge of whether the charge was based on fact or was made in the heat of an emotional battle over wage negotiations. However, if true, this condition alone would, in my opinion, make the shares of this company unsuitable for holding by careful investors. Besides treating employees with dignity and decency, the routes to obtaining genuine employee loyalty are many and varied. Pension and profit-sharing plans can play a significant part. So can good communication to and from all levels of employees. Concerning matters of general interest, letting everyone know not only exactly what is being done but why frequently eliminates friction that might otherwise occur. Actually knowing what people in various levels of the company are thinking, particularly when that view is adverse, can be even more important. A feeling throughout the company that people can express their grievances to superiors without fear of reprisal can be beneficial, although this open-door policy is not always simple to maintain because of the time wasted by cranks and nuts. When grievances occur, decisions on what to do about them should be made quickly. It is the long smoldering grievance that usually proves the most costly. A striking example of the benefits that may be attained through creating a unity of purpose with employees is the People Effectiveness Program of Texas Instruments. The history of this program is an excellent example of how brilliant management perseveres with imperfects. policies of this sort even when new outside influences force some redirection of these policies. From the early days of this company, top management held a deep conviction that everyone would gain if a system could be set up whereby all employees participated in managerial-type decisions to improve performance, but that, to sustain interest on the part of employees, all participants must genuinely benefit from the results of their contributions. In the 1950s, semiconductor production was largely a matter of hand assembly, offering many opportunities for employees to make brilliant individual suggestions for improving performance. Meetings, even formal classes, were held in which production workers were shown how they could as individuals or groups show the way to improving operations. At the same time, through both profit-sharing plans and awards and honors, those participating benefited both financially and by feeling they were part of the picture. Then mechanization of these former manual operations started to appear. As this trend grew, there was somewhat less opportunity for certain types of individual contributions, as in certain ways the machines controlled what would be done. A few foremen within the organization began feeling that there was no longer a place for lower-level contributions to management-type participation. Top management took quite the opposite viewpoint. People participation would play a greater role than ever before. Now, however, it would be a group or team effort with the workers as a group estimating what could be done and setting their own goals for performance. Because workers started feeling that they, 1. were genuinely participating in decisions, not just being told what to do, and 2. were being rewarded both financially and in honors and recognition, the results have been spectacular. In instance after instance, teams of workers have set for themselves goals quite considerably higher than anything management would have considered suggesting. At times when it appeared that targeted goals might not be met or when inter-team competition was producing rivalry, the workers proposed and voluntarily voted such unheard of things, for this day and age, as cutting down on coffee breaks or shortening lunch periods to get the work out. The pressure of peer groups on the tardy or lazy worker who threatens the goals the group has set for itself dwarfs any amount of discipline that might be exerted from above through conventional management methods. Nor are these results confined to U.S. workers with their lifelong background in political democracy. They appear to be equally effective and mutually beneficial to people, regardless of the color of their skin and their origins from countries of quite different economic backgrounds. Though the Performance Goal Plan was first initiated in the United States, equally striking results have appeared not just in Texas Instruments plants in the so-called developed industrial nations such as France and Japan but also in Singapore, with its native Asian employees, and in Curacao, where those on the payroll are overwhelmingly black. In all countries the morale effects appear striking when worker teams not only report directly to top management levels but also know their reports will be heeded and their accomplishments recognized and acknowledged. What all this has meant to investors was spelled out when company president Mark Shepard, Jr., addressed stockholders at the 1974 annual meeting. He stated that a People Effectiveness Index had been established consisting of the net sales bill divided by the total payroll. Since semiconductors, the company's largest product line, are one of the very few products in today's inflationary world that consistently decline in unit price, and since wages have been rising at the company's plants at rates from 7% a year in the United States to 20% in Italy and Japan, it would be logical to expect, in spite of improvements in people effectiveness, this index to decline. Instead it rose from about 2.25% in 1969 to 2.5% by the end of 1973. Furthermore, With definite plans for additional improvement and with further increases in profit-sharing funds tied into such improvement, it was announced that it was the company's goal to bring the index up to 3.1% by 1980, a goal that, if attained, would make the company a dramatically profitable place to work. Over the years, Texas Instruments has frequently publicized some rather ambitious long-range goals and to date has rather consistently accomplished them. From the investment standpoint, there are some extremely important similarities in the three examples of people-oriented programs that were chosen to illustrate aspects of the second dimension of a conservative investment. It is a relatively simple matter to mention and give a general description of Motorola's Institute for Selecting and Training Unusual Talent to handle the growing needs of the company. It is an equally simple affair to mention that Dow found a means to stimulate people to work together to master environmental problems and to make them profitable for the company, or to state a few facts about the remarkable People Effectiveness Program at Texas Instruments. However, if another company decided to start programs like these from scratch, the problems that could arise might be infinitely more complicated than merely persuading a board of directors to approve the necessary appropriation. Programs of this kind are easy to formulate, but their implementation is a quite different matter. Mistakes can be very costly. It is not hard to imagine what might happen if a training school such as Motorola selected the wrong people for promotion, with the result that the best junior talent quit the company in disgust. Similarly, suppose a company tried to follow, in general, a people effectiveness plan but either failed to create an atmosphere where workers genuinely felt themselves involved or failed to compensate their employees adequately, with the result that they became disillusioned. The misapplication of such a program could literally wreck a company. Meanwhile, companies that do perfect advantageous people-oriented policies and techniques usually find more and more ways to benefit from them. For these companies, such policies and techniques, these special ways of approaching problems and of solving them, are in a sense proprietary. For this reason they are of great importance to long-range investors. 3. Management must be willing to submit itself to the disciplines required for sound growth. It has already been pointed out that in this rapidly changing world companies cannot stand still. They must either get better or worse, improve or go downhill. The true investment objective of growth is not just to make gains but to avoid loss. There are very few companies whose managements will not make claims to being growth companies. However, a management that talks about being growth-oriented is not necessarily actually so oriented. Many companies seem to have an irresistible urge to show the greatest possible profits at the end of each accounting period, to bring every possible cent down to the bottom line. This a true growth-oriented company can never do. Its focus must be on earning sufficient current profits to finance the costs of expanding the business. When adjustment for earning the required additional financial strength has been made, the company worthy of far-sighted investment will give priority to curtailing maximum immediate profits when there are genuine worthwhile opportunities for developing new products or processes or for starting new product lines or for any one of the 101 more mundane actions whereby a dollar spent today may mean many dollars earned in the future. Such actions can vary all the way from hiring and training new personnel that will be needed as the business grows to foregoing the greatest possible profit on a customer's order to build up his permanent loyalty by rushing something to him when he needs it badly. For the conservative investor, the test of all such actions is whether management is truly building up the long-range profits of the business rather than just seeming to. No matter how well known, the company with a policy that only gives lip service to these disciplines is not likely to prove a happy vehicle for investment funds. Neither is one that tries to follow these disciplines but falls down in executing them, as, for example, a company that makes large research expenditures but so mishandles its efforts as to gain little from them. 3. The third dimension, investment characteristics of some businesses. The first dimension of a conservative stock investment is the degree of excellence in the company's activities that are most important to present and future profitability. The second dimension is the quality of the people controlling these activities and the policies they create. The third dimension deals with something quite different, the degree to which there does or does not exist within the nature of the business itself certain inherent characteristics that make possible an above-average profitability for as long as can be foreseen into the future. Before examining these characteristics, it may be well to point out why above-average profitability is so important to the investor, not only as a source of further gain but as a protection for what he already has. The vital role of growth in this connection has already been discussed. Growth costs money in many ways. Part of what otherwise would be the profit stream has to be diverted to experimenting, inventing, test marketing, new product marketing, and all the other operating costs of expansion, including the complete loss of the inevitable percentage of such expansion attempts that are bound to fail. Even more costly may be the additions to factories or stores or equipment that must be made. Meanwhile, as the business grows, more inventory will inevitably be needed to fill the pipelines. Finally, except for the very few businesses that sell only for cash, there will be a corresponding drain on corporate resources to take care of the growing volume of receivables. To accomplish all these things, profitability is vital. In inflationary periods, the matter of profitability becomes even more important. Usually when prices and, therefore, costs are rising on a broad front, a business can, in time, pass these costs along through higher prices of its own. However, this often cannot be done immediately. During the interim, obviously a much smaller bite is taken out of the profits of the broad profit margin company than occurs for its higher cost competition, since the higher cost company is probably facing comparably increased costs of doing business. Profitability can be expressed in two ways. The fundamental way, which is the yardstick used by most managements, is the return on invested assets. This is the factor that will cause a company to decide whether to go ahead with a new product or process. What percent return can the company expect on the part of its capital invested in this particular way in comparison to what the return might be if the same amount of its assets was employed in some other way? It is considerably more difficult for the investor to use this yardstick than it is for the corporate executive. What the investor usually sees is not the return on a specific amount of present-day dollars utilized in a specific subdivision of the business but the total earnings of the business as a percentage of its total assets. When the cost of capital equipment has risen as much as it is in the last 40 years, comparisons of the return on total invested capital between one company and another may be so distorted by variations in the price levels at which different companies made major expenditures that the figures are highly misleading. For this reason, comparing the profit margins per dollar of sales may be more helpful as long as one other point is kept in mind. This is that a company that has a high rate of sales in relation to assets may be a more profitable company than one with a higher profit margin to sales but a slower rate of sales turnover. For example, a company that has annual sales 3 times its assets can have a lower profit margin but make a lot more money than one that needs to employ $1 of assets in order to obtain each dollar of annual sales. However, while from the standpoint of profitability return on investment must be considered as well as profit margin on sales, From the standpoint of safety of investment, all the emphasis is on profit margin on sales. Thus, if two companies were each to experience a 2% increase in operating costs and were unable to raise prices, the one with a 1% margin of profit would be running at a loss and might be wiped out, while, if the other had a 10% margin, the increased costs would wipe out only 1/5 of its profits. There is one final matter to be kept in mind in order to place this dimension of conservative investing in proper perspective. In today's highly fluid and competitive business world, obtaining well above average profit margins or a high return on assets is so desirable that, whenever a company accomplishes this goal for any significant period of time, it is bound to be faced with a host of potential competitors. If the potential competitors actually enter the field, they will cut into markets the established company now has. Normally, when potential competition becomes actual competition, the ensuing struggle for sales results in anything from a minor to a major reduction in the high profit margin that had theretofore existed. High profit margins may be compared to an open jar of honey owned by the prospering company. The honey will inevitably attract a swarm of hungry insects bent on devouring it. In the business world, there are but two ways a company can protect the contents of its honey jar from being consumed by the insects of competition. One is by monopoly, which is usually illegal, although, if the monopoly is due to patent protection, it may not be. In any event, monopolies are likely to end quite suddenly and do not commend themselves as vehicles for the safest type of investing. The other way for the honey jar company to keep the insects out is to operate so much more efficiently than others that there is no incentive for present or potential competition to take action that will upset the existing situation. Now let us turn from this background discussion of relative profitability to the heart of the third dimension of conservative investing, namely, the specific characteristics that enable certain well-managed companies to maintain above-average profit margins more or less indefinitely. Possibly the most common characteristic is what businessmen call the economies of scale. A simple example of economy of scale: a well-run company making 1 million units a month will often have a lower production cost for each unit than a company producing only 100,000 units in the same period. The difference between the cost per unit of these two companies, one 10 times larger than the other, can vary considerably from one line of business to another. In some there may be almost no difference at all. Furthermore, it should never be forgotten that in any industry the larger company will have a maximum advantage only if it is exceedingly well run. The bigger a company is, the harder it is to manage efficiently. Quite often the inherent advantages of scale are fully balanced or even more than balanced by the inefficiencies produced by too many bureaucratic layers of middle management, consequent delays in making decisions, and, at times, the seeming inability of top executives in the largest companies to know quickly just what needs corrective attention in various subdivisions of their far-flung complexes. On the other hand, when a company clearly becomes the leader in its field, not just in dollar volume but in profitability, it seldom gets displaced from this position as long as its management remains highly competent. As discussed in examining the second dimension of a conservative investment, such a management must retain the ability to change corporate ways to match the ever-changing external environment. There is a school of investment thinking that advocates acquiring shares in the number 2 or 3 company in a field because these can go up to number 1, whereas the leader is already there and might slip. There are some industries where the largest company does not have a clear leadership position. But, where it does, we emphatically do not agree with this viewpoint. It has been our observation that, in many years of trying, Westinghouse has not surpassed General Electric, Montgomery Ward has not overtaken Sears, and, once IBM established early dominance in its areas of the computer market, even the extreme efforts of some of the largest companies in the country, including General Electric, did not succeed in displacing IBM from its overwhelming share of that market. Neither have scores of smaller price-cutting suppliers of peripheral equipment been able to displace IBM as the main and most profitable operator in that phase of the computer industry. What enables a company to obtain this advantage of scale in the first place? Usually getting there first with a new product or service that meets worthwhile demand and backing this up with good enough marketing, servicing, product improvement, and, at times, advertising to keep existing customers happy and coming back for more. This frequently establishes an atmosphere in which new customers will turn to the leader largely because that leader has established such a reputation for performance, or sound value, that no one is likely to criticize the buyer adversely for making this particular selection. In the heyday of the attempts of others to cut into IBM's computer business, no one will ever know how many employees of corporations planning to use a computer for the first time recommended IBM rather than a smaller competitor whose equipment they privately thought was better or cheaper. In such instances, the primary motive was probably a feeling that if, later on, the equipment should fail to perform, those making the recommendation would not be blamed if they had chosen the industry leader but could very well find their necks out a mile if a failure occurred and they had chosen a smaller company without an established reputation. There is a saying in the pharmaceutical industry that, when a truly worthwhile new drug is created, the company that gets in first takes and holds 60% of the market, thereby making by far the bulk of the profits. The next company to introduce a competitive version of the same product gets perhaps 25% of the market and makes moderate profits. The next 3 companies to arrive divide perhaps 10% to 15% of the market and earn meager profits. Any further entrants usually find themselves in a quite unhappy position. A trend toward the substitution of generic for trade names may or may not upset these ratios, and in any case there cannot be said to be an exact formula applicable to other industries. Nevertheless, the concept behind them should be kept in mind when an investor attempts to appraise which companies have a natural advantage in regard to profitability and which do not. Lower production costs and greater ability to attract new customers because of a well-recognized trade name are not the only ways that scale can consistently give a company competitive strength. Examining some of the factors behind the investment strength of the soup division of the Campbell Soup Company is illuminating. In the first place, as by far the largest soup canners in the nation, this company can reduce total costs through backward integration as smaller companies cannot. Making many of their own cans exactly to meet their own needs is a case in point. More important, Campbell has enough business so that it can scatter canning plants at strategic spots across the nation, which makes for a sizable double advantage. It is both a shorter haul for the grower delivering his produce to the cannery and a shorter average haul from cannery to supermarket. Since canned soup is heavy in relation to its value, freight costs are significant. This puts the smaller canner with only 1 or 2 plants at a big disadvantage in trying to compete in a nationwide market. Next, and probably most important of all, because Campbell's is a recognized product that the customer knows and wants when he enters the supermarket, the retailer automatically awards to it a prominent and fairly sizable area of his always sought-after shelf space. In contrast, he is usually quite reluctant to do as much for a less known or unknown competitor. This prominent shelf space helps to sell the soup and is still another factor tending to keep the number one company on top, a factor extremely discouraging for potential competitors. Also discouraging for them is Campbell's normal advertising budget, which adds very much less to the cost per can sold than such a budget would for a competitor with a very much smaller output. For reasons such as these, this particular company has strong inherent forces tending to protect profit margins. However, to present a complete picture, we must note some influences working in the opposite direction. When Campbell's own costs rise, as they can do sharply in an inflationary period, prices to the consumer cannot be raised more than the average of other foods, or there could be a shift in demand away from soups to other staples. Far more important, Campbell has a major competitor that most companies do not have to contend with, and that, as rising production costs cause higher prices to the consumer, can cut significantly into Campbell's market. This is the American housewife fighting her battle of the budget by making soup in her own kitchen. This point is mentioned merely to show that even when scale affords huge competitive advantages and a company is well run, these characteristics, important as they are, do not, of themselves, assure extreme profitability. Scale is by no means the only investment factor tending to perpetuate the much greater profitability and investment appeal of some companies over others. Another which we believe is of particular interest is the difficulty of competing with a highly successful, established producer in a technological area where the technology depends on not one scientific discipline but the interplay of two or preferably several quite different disciplines. To explain what I mean, let us suppose that someone develops an electronic product that promises to open up sizable new markets in either the computer or instrument field. There are enough highly capable companies in both areas that have in-house experts able to duplicate both the electronic hardware and the software programming that such products require, so that if the new market appears large enough, sufficient competition may soon develop to make the profits of the smaller innovator rather tenuous. In areas such as these, the successful large company has a further built-in advantage. Many such lines cannot be sold unless a network of service people is available to make rapid repair at the customer's locations. The large established company usually has such an organization in being. It is extremely difficult and expensive for a small new company introducing a worthwhile new product to establish such a network. It may be even harder for the new company to convince a potential buyer that it has the financial staying power not only to have the service network in place when the sale is made but to keep it there in the future. Furthermore, while all these influences have made it difficult in the past for the newcomer with an exciting product to establish real leadership in most subdivisions of the electronics industry, although a few companies have done so, it is likely to be still more difficult in the future. This is because the semiconductor is becoming a larger and larger percentage of both the total content and the total technical know-how of more and more products. The leading companies making these devices also now have at least as much in-house knowledge as the top old-line computer and instrument companies if they elect to compete in many new product areas that are largely electronic. A case in point is the dramatic success of Texas Instruments in the sensationally growing area of handheld calculators and the difficulties of some of the early pioneers in this field. However, notice how the balance changes if, instead of just a technology based on electronic hardware and software, producing the product calls for these skills to be combined with some quite different ones such as nucleonics or some highly specialized area of chemistry. The large electronic companies simply do not have the in-house skills to enter these interdisciplinary technologies. This affords the best-run innovators a far better opportunity to build themselves into the type of leadership position in their particular product line that carries with it the broad profit margin that tends to continue as long as managerial competence does not weaken. I believe that some of these multidisciplinary technological companies, in not all of which is electronics a significant factor, have recently proven some of the finest opportunities for truly far-sighted investing. I am inclined to think that more such opportunities will occur in the future. Thus, for example, I suspect that sometime in the future new leading companies will arise through products or processes that utilize some of these other disciplines combined with biology, although so far I have not seen any company in this area that so qualifies. This is not to say that none exists. Technological development and scale are not the only aspects of a company's activities in which unusual circumstances may raise opportunities for sustained high profit margins. In certain circumstances, these can also occur in the area of marketing or sales. An example is a company that has created in its customers the habit of almost automatically specifying its products for reorder in a way that makes it rather uneconomical for a competitor to attempt to displace them. Two sets of conditions are necessary for this to happen. First, the company must build up a reputation for quality and reliability in a product, A, that the customer recognizes is very important for the proper conduct of his activities, B, where an inferior or malfunctioning product would cause serious problems, C, where no competitor is serving more than a minor segment of the market so that the dominant company is nearly synonymous in the public mind with the source of supply, and yet, D, the cost of the product is only a quite small part of the customer's total cost of operations. Consequently, moderate price reductions yield only very small savings in relation to the risk of taking a chance on an unknown supplier. However, even this is not enough to ensure that a company fortunate enough to get itself in this position will be able to enjoy above-average profit margins year after year. Second, it must have a product sold to many small customers rather than a few large ones. These customers must be sufficiently specialized in their nature that it would be unlikely for a potential competitor to feel they could be reached through advertising media such as magazines or television. They constitute a market in which, as long as the dominant company maintains the quality of its product and the adequacy of its service, it can be displaced only by informed salesmen making individual calls. Yet the size of each customer's orders makes such a selling effort totally uneconomical. A company possessing all these advantages can, through marketing, maintain an above-average profit margin almost indefinitely unless a major shift in technology, or, as already mentioned, a slippage in its own efficiency, should displace it. Companies of this type can most often be found in the moderately high technology supply area. One of their characteristics is to maintain their image of leadership by holding frequent technical seminars on the use of their product, a marketing tool that proves highly effective once a company attains this type of position. It should be noted that the above-average profit margin or greater than normal return on investment need not be, in fact, should not be, many times that earned by industry in general to give a company's shares great investment appeal. Actually, if the profit or return on investment is too spectacular, it can be a source of danger, as the inducement then becomes almost irresistible for all sorts of companies to try to compete so as to get a share of the unusual honey pot. In contrast, a profit margin consistently just 2 or 3% of sales greater than that of the next best competitor is sufficient to ensure a quite outstanding investment. To summarize the matter of the third dimension of a truly conservative investment, It is necessary not just to have the quality of personnel discussed in the second dimension but to have had that personnel, or their predecessors, steer the company into areas of activity where there are inherent reasons within the economics of the particular business so that above-average profitability is not a short-term matter. Put simply, the question to ask in regard to this third dimension is, what can the particular company do that others would not be able to do about as well? If the answer is almost nothing, so that, as the business gets more prosperous, others can rush in to share in the company's prosperity on about equal terms, the evidence is conclusive that while the company's stock may be cheap, the investment fails to qualify as to this third dimension. 4. The fourth dimension. Price of a conservative investment. The fourth dimension of any stock investment involves the pre-earnings ratio, that is, the current price divided by the earnings per share. In the attempt to appraise whether the price-earnings ratio is in line with a proper valuation for that specific stock, trouble begins to arise. Most investors, including many professionals who should know better, become confused on this point because they don't have a clear understanding of what makes the price of the particular stock go up or down by a significant amount. This misunderstanding has resulted in losses in billions of dollars by investors who find out later that they own stocks bought at prices that they never should have paid. Even more billions have been lost as investors have sold out, at the wrong time and for the wrong reasons, shares they had every reason to hold and which, if held, would have become extremely profitable as long-range investments. Still another result is one that, if it happens repeatedly, will seriously impair the ability of deserving corporations to obtain adequate financing, with all that this could mean in a lower standard of living for everyone. Every time individual stocks take sickening plunges, another group of badly burned investors places the blame on the system rather than on their own mistakes or those of their advisors. They conclude that common stocks of any type are not suitable for their savings. The other side of the coin is that many other investors can be found who over the years have prospered mightily from holding the right stocks for considerable periods of time. Their success may be due to understanding basic investment rules, or it may be due to just plain good luck. However, the common denominator in this success has been the refusal to sell certain unusual high-quality stocks simply because each has had such a sharp fast rise that its price-earnings ratio suddenly looks high in relation to that to which the investment community had become accustomed. In view of the importance of all this, it is truly remarkable that so few have looked beneath the surface to understand exactly what causes these sharp price changes. Yet the law that governs them can be stated reasonably simply: every significant price move of any individual common stock in relation to stocks as a whole occurs because of a changed appraisal of that stock by the financial community. Let us see how this works in practice. 2 years ago, Company G was considered quite ordinary. It had earned $1 per share and was selling at 10 times earnings, or $10. During these last 2 years, most companies in its industry have been showing a downward profit trend. In contrast, a series of brilliant new products, combined with better profit margins on old products, enabled G Company to report $1.40 per share last year and $1.82 this year, and to give promise of further gains over the next several years. Obviously, the actions within the company that produced the sharp contrast between G's recent results and those of others in the industry could not have started just 2 years ago but must have been going on for some time. Otherwise, the operating economies and the brilliant new products would not have occurred. However, belated recognition, that is, appraisal, of how well G is qualifying in regard to matters covered in our discussions of the first three dimensions has now caused the price-earnings ratio to rise to 22. When compared with other stocks showing similar above-average business characteristics and comparable growth prospects, this ratio of 22 does not appear at all high. Since 22 times $1.82 is $40, here is a stock that has legitimately gone up 400% in 2 years. Equally important, a record such as G's is frequently an indication that there is now a functioning management team capable of continued growth for many years ahead. Such a growth, even at a more modest rate averaging, say, 15% in the next decade or two, could easily result in profits by that time running into the thousands rather than the hundreds of percent. The matter of appraisal is the heart of understanding the seeming vagaries of price-earnings ratios. It should never be forgotten that an appraisal is a subjective matter. It has nothing necessarily to do with what is going on in the real world about us. Rather, it results from what the person doing the appraising believes is going on, no matter how far from the actual facts such a judgment may be. In other words, any individual stock does not rise or fall at any particular moment in time because of what is actually happening or will happen to that company. It rises or falls according to the current consensus of the financial community as to what is happening and will happen regardless of how far off this consensus may be from what is really occurring or will occur. At this point, many pragmatic individuals simply throw up their hands in disbelief. If the huge price changes that occur in individual stocks are made solely because of changed appraisals by the financial community, with these appraisals sometimes completely at variance with what is going on in the real world of a company's affairs, what significance have the other three dimensions? Why bother with the expertise of business management, scientific technology, or accounting at all? Why not just depend on psychologists? The answer involves timing,